Hey, everybody. It's Chris Metzler here. I'm Director of Programming at the Green Film Festival of San Francisco. Given all the stories we're sharing, and also I didn't have clean laundry today, I'm wearing my tie-dye shirt. Seems appropriate for the Green Film Festival. You just had a chance to see the wonderful film, The Last Dive, and we're lucky enough to have director Cody Sheehy here. Welcome, Cody.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for watching the film.
Very cool. Well, this was a neat film to kind of stumble upon, and I know you've been on a great run with the film since it debuted at Tribeca earlier in the year. Um, what you know, what was it about this story that knew that like you just needed to kind of pick up the camera and share it on screen?
Well, I would just start by saying, I live on a sailboat down in Mexico for about half of every year. So during the winter time between November and May, my wife and I have a 3.5-year-old son. We go down to the boat and we cruise around the Baja. And that is how I met Terry, who's the main subject, as you know. I met him probably 10 years ago. And we just at first, we just became dive buddies. So we were just scuba diving together and hanging out. And I was hearing all these crazy stories from his past. But one day, a few years ago, he pulled out a box of footage and it was just full of, hundreds of hours of recordings that he'd made with him and Willie. And that's when I knew that there was a great story here and that everything he'd been telling me was 100% true and is all documented. And it just blew my mind. And I knew it blew everybody else's mind too, because he just had this amazing life. So.
Very cool. And given your kind of other filmmaking endeavors and things like, um, how did you kind of approach it in the sense of like working with a close friend, I guess, and a collaborator and sharing their story? How is that different than like other films that you've made, and what was that kind of collaboration process like?
Well, it's different, but it's also the same in a lot of ways. As a director, I think the foundation of a good documentary is just a lot of trust between the subjects and the director. And that doesn't mean that, you're going to just tell the story in only ways that make them look good or whatever. But it means that they trust you with their story, that you're going to do a really good job, and they understand what they're getting into before, the cameras roll. And in the case of Terry, I just sat him down and said, if you're willing to go into some of the more troubling parts of your life, I think that's going to add so much emotional depth to this story that I think a lot of people will get to see it. And if a lot of people get to see it, a lot of people are going to experience the manta rays and learn about them. And it's going to be a really good thing for the world. So that's what worked. And he agreed to that. And that's what we set out to do.
Very nice. And when you're dealing with a story with so many layers, more like, I mean, every documentary story has layers, but this one, has even more like, what was that kind of like process of kind of weaving together, the story, and then also what were some of the kind of biggest surprises when she kind of decided to dive in?
Yeah, I mean, one of our big challenges was just that Terry's life is so amazing, and he's had so many incredible experiences. We really had to just kind of narrow the field and say, okay, we're going to focus on Willie and his relationship with Willie, and if it doesn't directly support or build that emotional bond, then has a danger of detracting from that and kind of stealing some of the emotional impact. And so, a lot of the stories of him hanging out with movie stars and other things he's done in his past are good ones, but we ended up cutting a lot of stuff. And that's a painful process because some of those stories were amazing, honestly.
And once you kind of started making this film, did it change your relationship at all to the ocean, when you are now out diving and things? Like, is there a different kind of perspective that you bring to things?
Yeah, I mean, I've always really had a passion for the ocean. Like I said, I live on a sailboat, love to dive, but making this film, I got a chance to hang out with Terry in a whole new way, and then of course experiencing diving with the mantas and meeting Chevy, the big manta underwater, and I feel like I developed a friendship with Chevy too, and the mantas really just kind of blew me away. I'd heard of them before, but I had no idea about just how intelligent they are, how curious they are, how much they love humans. They're just seeking out and developing these relationships with us. I don't know of that many animals. I mean, everyone has a dog, a pet, and I think we have that kind of relationship with them, but a wild animal, it's really rare. And they love humans. And that whole experience to me just it's totally changed how I view the ocean. And I don't know, I hope mantas are around for my son when he's older.
Yeah. Well, it raises another question, but of course have to ask, there was that interesting doc a few years ago, The Octopus Teacher, which I think,
Hmm.
in some ways kind of shows that there's this kind of larger audience, for stories. And so, um, were there films with that film, or were there films that kind of influenced how you wanted to approach it, or also like, look, we totally want to avoid this or not, So just since we all, as documentary filmmakers, kind of ride the wave that's, there yet. Like, what were your thoughts on The Octopus Teacher? Also, how did it affect like the way you approach this film, or even getting out in the world?
Well, I love the My Octopus Teacher film. That's a great movie, and it's got that emotional impact for sure. And then another one that really inspired me years ago was The Cove. And I know the people who worked on The Cove really well, like Mark Monroe, our producer. He was also the writer producer on The Cove. And one of the lessons that they learned that we wanted to avoid was a lot of people were actually worried about, the slaughter of dolphins and the graphic nature of it, and that the film has this feeling of dread because you know that something terrible happens. And so a lot of people actually avoided that film in some ways. And so even though it was critically acclaimed, it didn't reach a big audience because of that element. So we knew that with our film, which has similar themes, we wanted to make sure that we stayed right in the emotional heart of the friendship, and that that's what the story would be about, and not dwell
Hmm.
too much on the slaughter and the destruction in the ocean and all the negativity that is really important because our oceans are being decimated. But that just turns off a lot of audiences. And I think Terry is a protagonist that has, a really unique background. He's not your normal conservationist. And we want to make sure that he could be an ambassador to a larger audience, other audiences that wouldn't normally click on something about manta rays or the ocean. And so we avoided that because of the Cove. My Octopus Teacher is a great film. And one of the things that we learned from that was, we wanted this one to feel pretty organic and not too constructed. And so My Octopus Teacher nails the emotional storyline. We wanted to have that, but at the same time, we wanted to be totally real and authentic. And hopefully we achieved that. But
Well, I think you did. I mean, obviously I really love the film, but I mean, right now we're recording this before the festival. Is like we've heard back from a couple press people who are right back to like, this is a great film, this is a great documentary. And even when the press love the film, it's like usually they're not emailing us to tell us that, So it's obviously, kind of striking a chord. And I think, that phrase that you had about like not your traditional conservationist, I think is one of the things that's really neat about the film is that kind of like um, often with films that deal with the environment, and we deal with this in our, own programming, is that sometimes stories can feel a little bit gated, in the sense of like just for a certain audience, or if you're not, and one of the problems with documentaries is documentaries often get reviewed on the subject matter, not the film, whereas like almost all other films, they get reviewed just on like, hey, is it a good story? And that, really enjoyed your film in the sense that like it can attract so many different people to come see it, and then ideally, right, once you get them in the theater and they're moved by a story, um, then they themselves, people are empowered to decide to like, okay, what can I do to kind of help out? And I guess that would be um, my next question in the sense of like, what are ways that the one is that we can continue to follow your career as a filmmaker, but also what can we do to kind of help out with the issue?
yeah, well, I appreciate that question. There's a lot of information on the lastdivefilm.com. And if you go to the Get Involved tab, what you'll see there is as two areas that we're really trying to use this film to make impact. One is for veterans, actually. And so Terry's a veteran. I think the film demonstrates like the healing power of the ocean. I mean, it changed Terry and gave him a second chance to do something amazing. And we're partnering with 4 different veterans groups to get veterans certified, for scuba, get them underwater. There's a therapy program there that'll help with help them have that same sense of peace that Terry finds, but also put them to work doing things like rebuilding reefs and ocean conservation. So it's a really great kind of win-win. And the other one, of course, is just supporting manta ray conservation and research. Right now we have a great, 80-foot offshore expedition vessel that's ready to support scientists, but a lot of these scientists down there don't have the grant funding to actually pay for a boat that they need to get out and work with the mantas and do that kind of thing. And so if there's an individual out there who wants to, make a large donation, they can come on board the boat, go out with the scientists. It'll be a really amazing exclusive opportunity to see this conservation and science happening firsthand. And we have some excellent missions planned. First one is to try to figure out where the mantas are having their pups, because nobody knows where they have their babies. And so that is critical for any conservation effort. Plus, it's never been filmed in the wild, and that would be an exciting thing to do. Yeah, and there's other ones we can talk about, but that's sort of the gist of it. Yeah.
Well, very cool. Everybody, you've seen this wonderful film. Please go check out the website, thelastdivefilm.com. And Cody, thanks again for making this film, but also sharing it with us at the Green Film Festival of San Francisco.
Well, I appreciate you, and thanks for the opportunity, and I hope everybody enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the festival.
Most definitely. Thank you.